This is my trusty, fully manual film SLR camera. Back in the days when these were made, it seemed like cameras like these were aimed at more of a professional market, whereas the more automated versions were aimed at the mass commercial market. However, in this digital age, it seems that even the high-end DSLR cameras have hundreds of automatic presets, which begs the question, do we even have to learn how to expose our photographs manually anymore? If so, why? And is it as scary as many beginner photographers make it out to be? Over the next 3 episodes of the Basics of Photography with Yorkshire Photo Walks, I'll be answering these questions and more, putting to bed the myths and giving you a step-by-step guide to manual exposure. Manual mode. 3 words that are enough to strike fear into the hearts of any beginner photographer. One of the questions I get asked more frequently than anything else on my photo walks is, in this modern digital age, is it necessary to learn how to expose my photographs manually? And my answer to that question is always a solid yes, of course it is. But why? Let me put it this way. Imagine you've just browsed round a car garage and you've seen the car that you would really like. It's a state-of-the-art car with all the mod cons, from a built-in sat-nav to reversing cameras to traction control. You're just about to pen the deal with the salesperson when you have to come clean and say that actually you don't really have a grasp of how to use the accelerator, brakes or gears. But not only would you look a bit silly, you're also about to waste a huge amount of money. It's the same when it comes to buying a camera. Yes, modern digital cameras have all these automatic settings in them, but if you don't understand the basics of manual exposure, then you're never going to be in full control of that camera. Just without the concept of gears, accelerator and brakes, you're never going to be in control of the car. The people that are really serious about learning photography, and I assume if you're watching this video this includes you, usually go through 3 stages of development. The first stage is where you use the automatic settings all the time and you're quite happy with the results that you're getting. You don't really see the point of learning anything new to be able to improve your photography skills. The second stage is where you come across an area of photography that you're really interested in. You set the automatic setting as you usually would, but realise that the result that you're getting isn't really what you envisaged or wanted. The automatic settings start to let you down. The third stage is the realisation that through manually exposing our photographs, we're taking away the control from the camera to ourselves as the photographer. So instead of relying on this computerized box to achieve something that's in our mind, we now as the photographer are in full control and therefore can get the results that we want every time we fire the shutter. I suppose at this stage I ought to clarify what I mean exactly by manual exposure. Cameras work, and always have worked, in a very similar way. They revolve around 3 variables, things that can be changed. These 3 variables are aperture, which is the hole in your lens that lets the light in; shutter speed, which is how long your camera's sensor is exposed to that light; and ISO, how sensitive your camera's sensor is to light. Together, these variables are known as the exposure triangle, and I'll cover this in a later episode of this mini-series. But for now, all we need to know is that by setting each of these variables individually, we are manually exposing our photographs. Most digital cameras have 3 manual settings: the full manual mode, symbolised with an M, and 2 semi-automatic manual modes: aperture priority, symbolised with an A, and shutter priority, symbolised with an S, or if you're using a Canon camera, it's symbolised with TV, which stands for time value. Now, you may have heard in the past, I know I have, people say that if you don't use the full manual mode all the time, then you're not a proper photographer. And this is the first myth that I must clarify, because it's simply not true. Imagine you're photographing wildlife or a sports scene, something that's going to be happening really quickly in front of the camera. If you're using full manual mode, it means that you're going to have to set 3 settings individually, which, in the time constraints that you have, is going to be pretty impossible. That's where we can fall back on our semi-automatic manual settings, setting just the aperture and letting the camera work out the shutter speed, or setting the shutter speed and letting the camera work out the aperture. This allows you to get the control that you would like, but also the speed that you need to be able to photograph that event happening in front of the lens. So just because you don't use the manual mode all the time doesn't mean that you're not a proper photographer. In fact, it's probably quite the opposite. At this stage, you may be thinking that if it's quicker and less technical, then I'm just going to use aperture priority or shutter priority all the time and completely ignore the full manual mode. But let me remind you that the more things that you let the camera set automatically, the less control you as the photographer are in. So when it comes to photographing things that don't necessarily move, where you've got a bit more time to think, then it pays to use the full manual mode, because you're going to get much better, more accurate results. So for things like landscape photography and architecture photography, then the full manual mode is definitely the best setting to go with. Another myth that I must clarify is that you may have heard somebody say that if you're using full manual mode, then you have to manually focus as well. But again, this is completely not true. The way that our cameras focus and the way that they expose a photograph are 2 completely different things. And these days, the autofocus settings in most cameras far outweigh the ability for our eye to find something and focus on it manually. Yes, like everything, there are some aspects of photography where manual focus works a lot better, but for the majority of the time, autofocus does a fantastic job. So don't think that you're not being a proper photographer just because you are auto-focusing when using the manual mode. So the final question that I asked in my introduction was, is manually exposing our photographs as scary as many beginner photographers think? Well, it's certainly one of the most technical aspects of photography that you'll ever learn. But it's important to remember that if you learn it properly, then it's just like learning to drive, ride a bike or swim. Once you've got the skills, you've got them for life. Over the next 2 episodes, I'm going to give you a step-by-step guide to manually exposing your photographs. What I cover is going to be technical, so please feel free to watch the videos as many times as you need. I also recommend having a pen and paper next to you so you can make notes, and also have your camera next to you so you can experiment with some of the settings that I cover. Manual exposure doesn't have to be scary. All we need to do is learn about it methodically and properly to get the best results. You're not going to become a prolific manual photographer overnight, but if you put the effort in and cover the stages that I'm going to cover in the next 2 videos, then you'll be well on your way to becoming a proficient manual photographer. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for watching.